Hello. Everything you need to know about living with art pretty much is summed up in this textbook. So I am going to read it chapter by chapter if all goes according to plan. So doesn't take long to read, maybe about 45 minutes to an hour. So read along with me if you want, or stop this video and read the chapter on your own. Here we go. So this is the introduction, part one, the introduction, living with art. Our simplest words are often the deepest in meaning: birth, kiss, flight, dream. The sculptor Constantine Brancusi spent his life searching for forms as simple and pure as those words, form that seem to have existed forever, outside of time. Born a peasant in a remote village in Romania, he spent most of his adult life in Paris, where he lived in a single small room adjoining a skylit studio. Upon his death in 1957, Brancusi willed the contents of his studio to the French government, which eventually recreated the studio itself in a museum. Near the center of the photograph are two versions of an idea Brancusi called endless column. Pulsing upward with great energy, the columns seem as though they would go on forever. Perhaps they do go on forever, and we can see only part of them. Directly in front of the white column, a sleek horizontal marble form looking something like a slender submarine seems to hover over a disc-shaped base. Brancusi called it simply fish. It does not depict any particular fish, but rather shows us the idea of something that moves swiftly and freely through the water, the essence of a fish. To the left of the dark column arching up in front of a patch of wall painted red, this is a version of one of Brancusi's most famous works, Bird in Space. Here again, the artist portrays not a particular bird, but rather the idea of flight, the feeling of soaring upward. Brancusi said that the work represents the soul liberated from matter. A photograph by Brancusi shows another, more mysterious view of Bird in Space. Light from a source we cannot see cuts across the work and falls in a sharp diamond shape on the wall behind. The sculpture casts a shadow so strong it seems to have a dark twin. Before it lies a broken, discarded work. The photograph might make you think of the birth of a bird from its shell, or of a perfect work of art arising from numerous failed attempts, or indeed of a soul newly liberated from its material prison. Brancusi took many photographs of his work, and through them we can see how the sculptures lived in his imagination, even after they were finished. He photographed them in varying conditions of light, in multiple locations and combinations, from close up and far away. With each photograph, they seem to reveal a different mood, the way people we know reveal different ideas of themselves over time. Living with art, Brancusi photographs show us. Living with art, Brancusi's photographs show us, is making art live by letting it engage our attention, our imagination, our intelligence. Few of us, of course, can live with art the way Brancusi did, yet we can choose to seek out encounters with art, to make it a matter for thought and enjoyment, and to let it live in our imaginations. You probably live already with more art than you think you do. Very likely the walls of your home are decorated with posters, photographs, or even paintings you choose because you find them beautiful or meaningful. Walking around your community, you probably pass by buildings that were designed for visual appeal as well as to serve practical ends. If you ever pause for a moment just to look at one of them, take pleasure, for example, in its silhouette against the sky, you have made the architect's work live for a moment by appreciating an effect that he or she prepared for you. We call such an experience an aesthetic experience. Aesthetics is the branch of philosophy concerned with the feelings aroused in us by sensory experiences. Experiences we have through sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Aesthetic concerns itself with our responses to the natural world and to the world we make. especially the world of art. What is art? How and why it affects us? These are some of the issues that aesthetics addresses. This book hopes to deepen your pleasure in the aesthetic experience by broadening your understanding of one of the most basic and universal of human activities, making art. Its subject is visual art, which is art that addresses the sense of sight, as opposed to music or poetry, which are the arts that appeal to the ear. It focuses on Western tradition, by which we mean art as it has been understood and practiced in Europe and in the cultures within their roots in Europe thought, such as the United States. But it also reaches back to consider works created well before Western ideas about art were in place and crossed to other cultures that have very different traditions of art. The impulse for art. No society that we know of, for as far back in human history as we have been able to penetrate, has lived without some form of art. The impulse to make and respond to art appears to be as deeply ingrained in us as the ability to learn language, part of what sets us apart as humans. Where does the urge to make art come from? What purpose does it serve? For answers, we might begin by looking at some of the oldest works yet discovered, images and artifacts dating from the Stone Age, near the beginning of the human experience. Named for one of the explorers who discovered it in 1994, the Chauvet Cave is one of hundreds of caves in Europe whose walls are decorated with images created during the Upper Paleolithic era, the latter part of the Old Stone Age. A number of these caves were already known when marvels of Chauvet came to light. But the Chauvet Cave created a sensation when radiocarbon dating confirmed that at least one of the images on its walls had been painted 32,000 years ago, thousands of years earlier than their accomplished style suggested. The galleries and chambers of Chauvet teemed with over 300 depictions of animals: lions, mammoths, rhinoceros, cave bears, horses, reindeer, red deer, aurochs, musk oxen, bison, and others, as well as palm prints and stenciled silhouettes of human hands. Evidence from this and other Paleolithic sites tell us something of how the paintings were made. Charcoal naturally tinted red and yellow clays and a black mineral called manganese dioxide served as pigments. They were ground to a powder with stone mortars, then mixed with a liquid that bound them into paint. Blood, animal fat, and calcium-rich cave water were some of the binders used. Paint was applied to the cave walls with fingers and animal hair brushes, or sprayed from the mouth or through a hollow reed. Some images were engraved or scratched into the rock. Others were drawn with a chunk of rock or charcoal held like a pencil. Deep in the interior of the caves, far from any natural light or living areas, the images would have created and viewed by the flickering light of torches or of stone lamps that may have burned animal fat using moss wicks. When Paleolithic cave paintings were first discovered during the late 19th century, scholars suggested that they had been made purely for pleasure during times of rest from hunting or occupations. But their presence in deep and difficult to reach areas seemed to work against that notion. For Stone Age image makers to have gone to such lengths, their work must have been meaningful. One influential early theory held that the images were a form of magic to ensure success in hunting. Other scholars began to look past individual images to consider each cave as a purposefully structured whole, carefully noting the placement of every image and symbolic marking within it. A related branch of research examines how Paleolithic artists responded to the unique characteristics of each underground space, including the space's acoustics. Most recently, it has been suggested that the images were used and rituals conducted by shamans, religious specialists who communicate with a parallel spirit world, often through animal spirit go-betweens. Fascinating as those theories are, they pass over perhaps the most amazing thing of all, which is that there should be images in the first place. The ability to make images is uniquely human. Anthropologists speak of an explosion of images during the Upper Paleolithic period, when anatomically modern humans arrived in Europe and began to displace the Neanderthal human population that had been living there for several 100,000 years. Along with musical instruments, personal ornaments, and portable sculptures, cave paintings were part of a cultural toolkit that must have given our ancestors an advantage over their now extinct Neanderthal competitors, helping communities to form and thrive in a new environment. If images had not been useful to us, we would have stopped making them. As it is, we have been making them ever since. All images may not be art, but our ability to make them is one place where art begins. The contemporary British sculptor Anthony Caro has said that all art is basically Paleolithic or Neolithic, either the urge to smear soot and grease on cave walls or pile stone on stone. By soot and grease, Caro means the cave paintings. With the urge to pile stone on stone, he has in mind one of the most impressive haunting works to survive from the Stone Ages, the structure in the South England known as Stonehenge. Today, much ruined through time and vandalism, Stonehenge at its height consisted of several concentric circles of megaliths, very large stones surrounded in turn by a circular ditch. It was built in several phases over many centuries, beginning around 3000 BCE. The tallest circle visible in the photograph here originally consisted of 30 gigantic upright stones capped with a continuous ring of horizontal stones, weighing some 50 tons each. The stones were quarried many miles away, hauled to the site, and laboriously shaped by blows from stone hammers until they fit together. Many theories have been advanced about why Stonehenge was built and what purpose it served. Recent archaeological research has confirmed that the monument marks a graveyard, perhaps that of a ruling dynasty. The cremated remains of up to 240 people appear to have been buried there over a span of some 500 years, from the earliest development of the site until the time when the great stones were erected. Other findings show that the monument did not stand alone, but was part of a larger complex, perhaps a religious complex, and used for funerary rituals. What is certain is that Stonehenge had held meaning for the Neolithic community that built it. For us, it stands as a compelling example of how old and how basic is our urge to create meaningful order and form, to structure our worlds so that it reflects our ideas. This is another place where art begins. Stonehenge was erected in the Neolithic era, or New Stone Age. The Neolithic era is named for the new kinds of stone tools that were invented, but it also saw such important advances as the domestication of animals and crops and the development of the technology of pottery, as people discovered that fire could harden certain kinds of clay. With pottery, storage jars, food bowls, and all sorts of other practical objects came into being. Yet much of the world's oldest pottery seems to go far beyond purely practical needs. This elegant stemmed cup was formed around 200 BCE, and in what is now eastern China. Eggshell thin and exceedingly fragile, it could not have held much of anything, and would have tipped over easily. In other words, it isn't practical. Instead, great care and skill have gone into making it pleasing to the eye. Here is a third place we might turn to for the origins of art, the urge to explore the aesthetic possibilities of new technologies. What are the limits of clay? The early potters must have wondered. What can be done with it? scholars believe such vessels were created for ceremonial use. They were probably made in limited quantity for members of a social elite. To construct meaningful images and forms, to create order and structure, to explore aesthetic possibilities, these characteristics seem to be part of our nature as human beings. From them, art has grown, nurtured by each culture in its own way. What do artists do? In our society, we tend to think of art as something created by specialists, people we call artists, just as medicine is practiced by doctors and bridges are designed by engineers. In other societies, virtually everyone contributes to art in some way. Yet, no matter how society organizes itself, it calls on its art makers to fulfill similar roles. First, artists create places for human purpose. Stonehenge, for example, was probably created as a place where a community could gather for rituals. Closer to our own time, Maya Lin created the Vietnam Veterans Memorial as a place for contemplation and remembrance. One of our most painful national memories, the Vietnam War, saw thousands of young men and women lose their lives in a distant conflict that was increasingly questioned and protested at home. By the war's end, the nation was so bitterly divided that returning veterans received virtually no recognition for their services. In this atmosphere of continuing controversy, Lin's task was to create a memorial that honored the human sacrifice of the war while neither glorifying nor condemning the war itself. At the heart of the memorial is a long, tapering, V-shaped wall of black granite inscribed with the names of the missing, the captured, and the dead, some 58,000 names in all. Set into the earth, exposed by slicing a great wedge from a gently sloping hill, it suggests perhaps a modern entrance to an ancient burial mound, though in fact there is no entrance. Instead, the highly polished surface acts as a mirror, reflecting the surrounding trees, the nearby Washington Monument, and the visitors themselves as they pass by. Entering along a walkway from either end, visitors are barely aware at first of the low wall at their feet. The monument begins just as the war itself did, almost unnoticed. A few support troops sent to small and distant country, a few deaths in the nightly news. As visitors continue their descent along the downward sloping path, the wall grows taller and taller until it towers overhead. Names upon names upon names. Often people reach out to touch the letters and as they do, they touch their own reflections, reaching back. At the walkway's lowest point, with the wall at its highest, a corner is turned, the path begins to climb upward, and the wall begins to fall away. Drawn by a view of either the Washington Monument, as in the photograph here, or the Lincoln Memorial along the other axis, visitors leave the war behind. In a quiet, unobtrusive way, the place that Maya Lin created encourages a kind of ritual, a journey downward into a valley of death, then upward toward hope, healing, and reconciliation. Like Stonehenge, it has served to bring a community together. Here's a little section on Maya Lin, and I'm not going to read those. You can read those for yourself. A second task artists perform is to create extraordinary versions of ordinary objects, just as the Neolithic vessels we looked at earlier is more than an ordinary drinking cup, so the textile here is more than an ordinary garment. Woven in West Africa by artists of the Asante people, it is a spectacular example of a type of textile known as kente. Kente is woven in hundreds of patterns, each with its own name, history, and symbolism. Traditionally, a newly invented pattern was shown first to the king, who had the right to claim it for his own exclusive use. Like the Neolithic vessel, royal kente was reserved for ceremonial occasions. Rich, costly, and elaborate, the cloth distinguished its wearer as special as well. an extraordinary version of an ordinary human being. A third important task for artists has been to record and commemorate. Artists create images that help us to remember the present after it slips into the past. That keep us in mind of our history, and that will speak of our time to the future. Our times to the future. Illustrated here is a painting created in the early 17th century by an artist named Manohar, one of several painters employed by the royal workshops of the Emperor Jahangir, a ruler of the Mughal dynasty in India. At the center of the painting, we see Jahangir himself seated beneath a sumptuous canopy. His son, Khusrau, dressed in a yellow robe, offers him the precious gift of a golden cup. The painting commemorates a moment of reconciliation between father and son who had a violent falling out. The moment did not last, however. Khusrau would soon stage an armed rebellion that cost him the throne. Although the intricate details of Mughal history may be lost on us today, the enchanting painting gives us a glimpse into their vanished world as they wanted it to be remembered. A fourth task for artists is to give tangible form to the unknown. They portray what cannot be seen with the eyes, or events that can only be imagined. An anonymous Indian sculptor of the 10th century gave tangible form to the Hindu god Shiva. In this guise, Nataraja, lord of the dance, encircled by flames, his long hair flying outward, Shiva dances the destruction and rebirth of the world, the end of one cycle of time and the beginning of another. The figure's four arms communicate the complexity of this cosmic moment. In one hand, Shiva holds the small drum whose beat summons up creation. In another hand, he holds the flame of destruction. A third hand points at his raised foot, beneath which worshippers may seek refuge, while a fourth hand is raised with a palm toward the viewer, a gesture that means, "Fear not." A fifth function artists perform is to give tangible form to feelings and ideas. The statue of Shiva we just looked at, for example, gives tangible form to ideas about the cyclical nature of time that are part of the religious culture of Hinduism. In The Starry Night, Vincent van Gogh labored to express his personal feelings as he stood on the outskirts of a small village in France and looked up at the night sky. Van Gogh had become intrigued by the belief that people journeyed to a star after their death, and that there they continued their lives, just as we take the train to get to Tarascon or Rouen. He wrote in a letter, "We take death to reach a star." Seen through the prism of that idea, the night landscape inspired in him a vision of great intensity. Surrounded by halos of radiating light, the stars have an exaggerated, urgent presence, as though each one were a brilliant sun. A great wave or whirlpool rolls across the sky, a cloud perhaps, or some kind of cosmic energy. The landscape, too, seems to roll on in waves like an ocean. A tree in the foreground writhes upward toward the stars, as though answering their call. In the distance, a church spire points upward as well. Everything is in turbulent motion. Nature seems alive, communicating in its own language while the village sleeps. Again, there's a sidebar on Vincent van Gogh, which I might read at the end of the chapter. Otherwise, you can find them. Some of the quiz questions are from these sidebars. Finally, artists refresh our vision and help us see the world in new ways. Habit dulls our senses. What we see every day, we no longer marvel at because it has become familiar. Through art, we can see the world through someone else's eyes and recover the intensity of looking for the first time. Ernst Haas's photograph, peeling paint on an iron bench, Kyoto, singles out a small detail of ordinary day and asks us to notice how rich it is if we really take the time to look. Rain has made the colors shine with fresh intensity, brilliant red against deep black, and the star-shaped leaves could almost be made of gold. After seeing through Ha's eyes, we may find ourselves, if only for a few hours, more attentive to the world around us, which is stranger, more mysterious, more various, and more meaningful than we usually realize. Out walking on a rainy day in Kyoto, Ernst Haas could have noticed the park bench, smiled with pleasure, and continued on his way. Standing in a field over a century ago, Van Gogh could have had his vision of the night sky, then returned to his lodgings, and we would never know about it. We all experience moments of insight that put us where art begins. For most of us, such moments are an end in themselves. For artists, they are a beginning, a kind of raw material that sets a creative process in motion. Creativity is a word that comes up often when talking about art. But what exactly is creativity? Are we born with it? Can it be learned? Can it be lost? Are artists more creative than other people? If so, how did they get that way? Creativity has been broadly defined as the ability to produce something that is both innovative and useful within given social context. Though the exact nature of creativity remains elusive, there is no definitive test for it. Psychologists agree that creative people tend to possess certain traits. Creative people have the ability to generate numerous ideas, many of them quite original, then to analyze their ideas, selecting the most promising ones to develop. They redefine problems, and seek connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. They tend to have a playful side, but they are also capable of long periods of intense, concentrated work. They take risks, remain open to experience, and do not feel restricted by existing knowledge or conventional solutions. Recently, advances in brain monitoring and imaging technologies have allowed neuroscientists to investigate creativity from their own point of view. With fascinating, though inconclusive, results. Using magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, to monitor white matter, the tissue that transmits signals from one area of the brain to another, one group of researchers discovered that nerve traffic, i.e., signal transmission, in a creative brain is slower and more meandering in key areas, perhaps allowing more novel and varied ideas to be linked up. Another study compared the brain activity in trained musicians and non-musicians as they improvised on a keyboard. Researchers found that when improvising, the trained musicians shut down the part of the brain that reads and sorts through incoming stimuli. By doing this, they blocked out potential distractions, allowing themselves to focus exclusively on the music they were making. Years of training had made an extra level of concentration available to them. Looking at a work of art, we know we are seeing the end result of a creative process, but we rarely have access to the process itself. Occasionally, sketches of initial ideas for work survive, or photographs that document its progress. In the case of Mike Kelly, Candor Full Set, we are lucky enough to have a text from the artist that relates how the work came to have the form we see, and through it we can witness something of the creative process in action. A fictional city on a fictional planet of Krypton, Kandor is the place where Superman, the comic book hero, was born. In the Superman story, we learn that Krypton was destroyed. Kandor, however, was miniaturized and stolen before the disaster. It eventually ended up in Superman's possession. He keeps it under a glass bell jar in his fortress of solitude. The subject of Kandor first occurred to Kelly when he was asked to participate in a museum exhibit that took place at the turn of the millennium, 1999 to 2000. Taking the beginning of a new century as its theme, the exhibition was to include historical objects from past turns of the century, with an emphasis on new media of the past. Several contemporary artists were asked to create work responding to these themes. Kelly was drawn to Candor because the Superman artists of the past had imagined it as a city of the future, much like cities in old science fiction films. His initial idea was to use the internet, a new medium just then coming into popular use, to reach out to Superman fans, asking them to contribute information and ideas about Candor to a website. From their input, models of the city would be created for exhibit in the museum. Website participants would be flown to the opening of the exhibition, showing that the project had created a community and that fears that the internet would isolate people and disconnect them from reality were unfounded. Kelly's initial idea had to be modified almost immediately. The museum's budget could never cost setting up a website, much less travel expenses for the participants. Another idea took shape. During his research for the project, Kelly had received from a collector photocopies of every image of Candor that had appeared in the Superman series. He was intrigued to find that the city had never been drawn the same way twice. There had never been a standardized image for the artist to follow. In the unstable image of Superman's childhood home, Kelly found a link to one of his own artistic preoccupations, the partial and unrecoverable nature of childhood memories, including memories of the spaces in which childhood unfolded. Kelly asked a digital animator to create a video of Candor's constantly shifting shape, and he commissioned architects to begin a scale model of Candor that drew freely on the photocopied images. The architects worked continuously as a part of the exhibition, which included signage that advertised Candor as though it were a housing development in progress. Candor would be completed in the year 419,500. One billboard announced Kelly's estimate of how long it would take to build a model of every building in every version of the city. The project had shifted in meaning from Kelly's original concept, becoming a work about failure to recapture the past, and the failure of so many optimistic visions of the future to come true. The theme of Candor was so rich that Kelly continued with it, this time focusing on the bell jar that kept the miniature city alive. He decided to have 20 jars blown of colored glass, reproducing designs that appeared in the Superman images. Using the figures from the cartoon panels as a guide to scale, the largest jars were to be over 40 inches in height. One famous glass center after another told him that it was physically impossible to blow a vessel that large, but Kelly persevered, finally locating a glassblower who agreed to take on the challenge. Kelly wanted to create a sense of motion and atmosphere inside the jars. He experimented with a number of methods to achieve this, including having particles of various substances blown around inside the jar by a compressor. This solution proved too noisy, but videos made of the swirling particles were captivating. Kelly worked with a composer to develop a soundtrack for the whirling atmospheric patterns of each video. He hoped to project the videos onto the bottles, but he found the results disappointing. Still, the videos were so compelling that he decided to include them in the exhibition, projecting onto the walls. The jars, he decided, would now house models of 20 versions of Candor cast in colored translucent resin, set on bases that Kelly designed after the Superman images and lit from below. The models seemed to glow from within. Only 10 of the models were completed in time for the project exhibit in 2007, but Kelly eventually finished all 20, showing the complete set for the first time in 2010, as illustrated on page 13. Visitors wandered in a darkened room and a display of luminous jewel-like cities, empty bell jars, and haunting videos. Kelly had created an enchanted space, a prolonged meditation on memory, loss, and desire. We can see many of the traits of creativity at work in Kelly's narrative of his Candor projects. The leap of imagination that led him to link Candor to the museum's proposal, the flexibility with which he responded to setbacks by generating new ideas, the way continued reflection on the theme deepened its meaning for him and suggested new forms, his willingness to experiment and take risks, and not least the persistence and concentration that allowed him to see the project through to completion. The profession of artist is not the only one that requires creativity. Scientists, mathematicians, teachers, business executives, doctors, librarians, computer programmers, people in every line of work, if they are any good, look for ways to be creative. Artists occupy a special place in that they have devoted their lives to opening the channel of visual creativity. Can a person learn to be more creative? Absolutely, say researchers. The key to creativity is the ability to alternate quickly between two models of thinking, generating ideas, and analyzing them, and this ability can be consciously cultivated. Furthermore, by regularly practicing a creative activity, people can learn to tap into the brain's creative network more rapidly and effectively. Creativity may not bring happiness, but it promotes a richer, more engaged life, and it is as essential to looking at art as it is to making it. We close this chapter with a look at what creative looking might entail. Science tells us, this is looking and responding. Science tells us that seeing is a mode of perception, which is the recognition and interpretation of sensory data. In other words, how information comes into our eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, fingertips, and what we make of it. In visual perception, our eyes take in information in the form of light patterns. The brain processes these patterns to give them meaning. The role of the eyes in vision is purely mechanical. Barring some physical disorder, it functions the same way for everyone. The mind's role in making sense of information, however, is highly subjective and belongs to the realm of psychology. Simply put, given the same situation, we do not all notice the same things, nor do we interpret what we see in the same way. One reason for our difference in perception is the immense amount of detail available for our attention at any given moment. To navigate efficiently through daily life, we practice what is called selective perception, focusing on the visual information we need for the task at hand and relegating everything else to the background. But other factors are in play as well. Our mood influences what we notice and how we interpret it, as does the whole of our prior experience. The culture we grew up in, relationships we have had, places we have seen, knowledge we have accumulated. The subjective nature of perception explains why a work of art may mean different things to different people, and how it is that we may return to a favorite work again and again, noticing new aspects of it each time. It explains why the more we know, the richer each new encounter with art will be, for we will all have more experience to bring to it. It explains why we should make every effort to experience as much art in person as possible, for physical dimensions also influence perception. The works produced in this book are miniaturized. Many other details escape reproduction as well. Above all, the nature of perception suggests that the most important key to looking at art is to become aware of the process of looking itself, to notice details and visual relationships, to explore the associations and feelings they inspire, to search for knowledge we can bring to bear, and to try to put what we see into words. A quick glance at Juan de Valdez Lille's Vanitas reveals a careless jumble of objects with a cherub looking over them. In the background, a man looks out at us from the shadows. But what are the objects, and what are the cherub and the man doing? Only if we begin to ask and answer such questions does the message of the painting emerge. In the foreground to the left is a timepiece. Next to it are three flowers, each one marking a stage in the brief life of a flower across time, budding, then blossoming, then dying as its petals fall away. Then come dice and playing cards, suggesting games of chance. Further on, a cascade of medals, money, and jewelry lead up to an elaborate crown, suggesting honors, wealth, and power. At the center, books and scientific instruments evoke knowledge. Finally, back where we began, a skull crowned with a laurel wreath lies on its side. Laurel traditionally crowns those who have become famous through their achievements, especially artistic achievements. Over this display, the cherub blows a bubble, as though making a comment on the riches before him. A bubble's existence is even shorter than a flower's, a few seconds of iridescent beauty, and then nothing. When we meet the man's gaze and we catch a glimpse of a wing, he is an angel, a messenger. He has drawn back a heavy curtain with one hand and is pointing at a painting as it has thus revealed with the other. Look at this, he all but speaks. The painting depicts the Last Judgment. In Christian belief, the Last Judgment is the moment when Christ will appear again. He will judge both the living and the dead, accepting some into paradise and condemning others to hell. The universe will end, and with it, time itself. We might paraphrase the basic message of the painting something like this: life is fleeting, and everything that we prize and strive for during it, ultimately meaningless. Neither wealth nor beauty, nor good fortune, nor power, nor knowledge, nor fame will save us when we stand before God at the end of the world. Without taking the time to perceive and reflect on the many details of this image, we would miss its message completely. Vanitas is Latin for vanity. It alludes to the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, a meditation on the fleeting nature of earthly life and happiness, in which we read that in the end all is vanity. The title wasn't invented or bestowed by the artist, rather it is a generic name for a subject that was popular during his lifetime. Numerous Vanitas paintings have come down to us from the 17th century, and together they show the many ways that artists treated its themes. Closer to our own time, the painter Audrey Flack became fascinated by the Vanitas tradition, and she created a series of her own, including Wheel of Fortune Vanitas. Knowing something of the tradition Flack is building on, we can more easily appreciate her updated interpretation. As ever, a skull puts us in mind of death. An hourglass, a calendar page, and a guttering candle speak of time and its passing. The necklace, mirrors, powder puff, and lipstick are contemporary symbols of personal vanity, while a die and a tarot card evoke the roles of chance and fate in our lives. As in the painting by Valdez, a visual echo encourages us to think about a connection, in this case between the framed oval photograph of a young woman and the framed oval reflection of the skull just below. Flack may be painting with one eye on the past, but the other is firmly on our society as we are now. For example, she includes modern inventions such as a photograph and a lipstick tube, and she shuns symbols that no longer speak to us directly, such as laurels and a crown. The specifically Christian context is gone as well, resulting in a more general message that applies to us all regardless of faith. Time passes quickly, beauty fades, chance plays a bigger role in our lives than we like to think, death awaits. Despite their differences, both Flack and Valdez provide us with many clues to direct our thoughts. They depict objects that have common associations and then trust us to add up the evidence. At first glance, a contemporary work such as Jim Hodges' Every Touch seems very different. Every touch is made of artificial silk flowers taken apart petal by petal. The petals were ironed flat, intermingled, then stitched together to form a large curtain or veil. Yet, although every touch may not direct our thoughts as firmly as the other work, we approach it in the same way. We look, and we try to become aware of our looking. We ask questions and explore associations. We bring our experience and knowledge to bear. We interrogate our feelings. We might think of spring. We might be put in mind of other art, such as the flowered backgrounds or of medieval tapestries, or the role of flowers in the Venetian tradition. We might think about flowers and the occasions on which we offer them. We might think about the flowers, and we know from poetry where they are often linked to beauty and youth, for all three fade quickly. We might think about petals which fall from dying flowers. We might think about veils and when we wear them, such as at weddings and funerals. We might notice how delicately the work is stitched together and how fragile it seems. We might think about looking not only at it, but also through it, and about how a curtain separates one realm from another. The angel in Valdez painting, for example, draws back a curtain to reveal the future. Every touch is not as easily put into words as the Venetian painting, but it can inspire thoughts about many of the same ideas. Seasons that come and go, how beauty and sadness are intertwined, the ceremonies that mark life's passing, the idea of one realm opening into another, and the fragility of things passing, in the end, what we see in every touch depends on what we bring to it, and if we approach the task sincerely, there are no wrong answers. Every touch will never mean for any of us exactly what it means for Hodges, nor should it. An artist's work grows from a lifetime of experiences, thoughts, and emotions. No one else can duplicate them exactly. Works of art hold many meanings, the greatest of them to speak anew to each generation and to each attentive observer. The most important thing is that some works of art come to mean something for you, that your own experiences, thoughts, and emotions find a place in them, for then you will have made them live. That is the end of chapter 1. It took me about 47 minutes, so should be able to read this one in 50 minutes or so, give or take. Come back to the next video for chapter 2, and then you'll be able to take the quiz on chapters 1 and 2.